Also, before we get started, a quick show of hands. Who is coding every day? Who is more on the management side? You're coding every day and you're on the management side. Good. Who is in a transformation project where they need to go much faster and everything is DevOps? Yeah, cool. DevOps is obviously a big term that people are throwing around, correct? Yeah. What does DevOps mean for you? Yeah? In a scripted manner, okay. Any other definitions of DevOps? Anybody ever tried to explain DevOps to somebody? To the people in the field? What do you mean, like the people that sell your software? Customers? At customer side. So you've explained it to them, yeah? Successfully? Oh, okay, so maybe having like a product owner that represents the customer, or really somebody out there that is kind of interacting with them on a continuous basis, telling them what's coming, yeah? That's a good point. All right, I have my own definition because what I'm talking about today is from 6 months waterfall to 1 hour code deploys, and I've been giving this presentation for about a year, and I recently moved back from the States to Linz, Austria, where I'm originally from. This is where one of our engineering teams is. The other one is actually in Gdansk, and by the way, we're hiring, but I guess who is not, right? But there's some cool stuff that they're building, and I've been with the company for more than 10 years, okay, with the same company, and I saw a lot of change, and it seems like change is always like a roller coaster ride, right? You do something really cool, and then if you don't keep track of it, you fall down again. And that's why we constantly want to make sure that we stay on top. It is hard, but I want to give you some ideas today on what we've done over the last couple of years to become better in software engineering. There's not a whole lot of code I'm going to show you today. So in case you're expecting a coding session, that's not what I'm doing today, even though I have my pipeline from the morning, and I want to show some self-healing that we are working on. But it's more going to be hopefully for people like you on the management side, but hopefully for everyone to learn what we do differently. Now, before we get started, I wanted to use the same slides again that I used in the morning, and now you can hear that I'm from Austria, and I can totally understand how you feel today. These are the Austrian football fans, and they always look like that because we never make it to the World Cup, where we don't have a chance to lose to a nation that we don't think we should lose to. So, but I can feel with you. And then this morning I actually asked, are there any Germans in the room? Oh, Mexico. I know. Another thing I added in the morning, I really liked the exercise that we did in the very morning at the keynote, and so I thought we'll just grab our partner next to us and we'll do something, right? Yeah. All right, before we get started, I asked you about DevOps because I believe one of the biggest things that changed us as an organization is what some people may refer to as DevOps. Completely changing the way we have responsibilities organized in our organization. Our developers are responsible for production. That's one thing, right? The way we deal with processes, with responsibilities. What I want to start with, though, is an exercise that I tried to do myself within my closest family circle. I tried to explain DevOps to my parents. Because I thought if I cannot explain DevOps to my parents, I probably have a very hard way to tell and communicate it correctly to other folks. So I want to really, make it very easy to understand. So my parents, as you can see here, my dad watching a Formula 1 Grand Prix, and my mom is so annoyed with the noise. That's why she bought him the headsets. I also gave them an iPad a couple of years ago, so now they can harass me with selfies all the time. But the way I explain it to my parents is, and not only DevOps, but really the transformation that we as an organization went through. I told them, remember when I was a teenager and when we went on a trip Right? I was born 79, so when I was a teenager and grew up in the 80s, we didn't have an iPhone in our pockets to take pictures, but we had these in our pockets. And most of you probably still remember those, right? Or at least some of you. I look at you, you're definitely that age. Yeah? You remember those. So I said when we went on a trip back then, we took pictures, and if the film roll wasn't full, we didn't just take random pictures, but we took the camera home with us and went on the next trip, weeks or months later, to make the film roll full. So basically we had 24 features in the box, like a big bang release. What we at DynaTrace used to do over the first couple of years when I started. Every 6 months we had a release with many beautiful features in there. Right? So just as with the picture analogy, when you have your release ready, you give it to somebody that actually knows what to do with it, like a company that develops the film. I'm sure they have some great quality control. They have people sitting in a dark room and say, this is the best picture, this is the best thing I can do, so let's ship it back to the customer. And then this was often the moment where whoever took the pictures then realized that what you thought you get is not what you really got, right? Maybe you realized that the picture you took months ago is completely worthless because somebody photobombed your picture, which leads to a lot of frustration because you cannot go back to that moment and retake the picture. It just takes too long. Make sense? So this is my analogy from waterfall development. And remember, this is what I explained to my parents. And I said, so now, Mutti and Fatti, as I call them, mom and dad, this is the way we're now taking pictures. And it actually explains the analogy and the transformation that we also in the software companies, in the software development process, go through. My back then, when I started telling the story, girlfriend, by now she's my wife, but back then, it was 2 years ago, I brought my wife to the Alps in Austria. She's from Colombia. I met her in Boston, where we lived together for a couple of years, and I brought her to Austria to show her, how beautiful Austria is, because eventually I wanted to bring her to Austria, which happened 4 weeks ago. So 4 weeks ago, we relocated. Yeah. And here's the coolest thing. In 4 weeks, on August 1st, she starts in our DevOps team. Yeah, because we are hiring, first of all, and she's an IT engineer as well. So, but the way she takes pictures, so she did it 2 years ago and now as well. She has her iPhone, in her case. She takes a picture and immediately gets feedback. But here's the coolest thing. Apple, in her case, said, we want to give all of our customers an automated delivery pipeline. So, instead of showing the picture to somebody that makes it better, she can optimize the picture on the spot because she uses Instagram or whatever other photo app she uses to optimize the picture based on automation that was built in that app, based on feedback that I'm sure a lot of photographers around the world gave Apple on how to make pictures better. So she takes a picture, optimizes it, takes a couple of minutes, and then she decides which picture when to deploy into production. And her production is Instagram and Facebook. Her customers are friends and family around the world, especially her dad, who still lives in Colombia. And what she wants is she wants to get likes, because we are living in this strange world where we want to make a lot of people out there happy with strange photos, or nice photos, obviously. And for instance, if her dad gives her feedback and saying, Austria looks great, but are you still dating Andy? Is this guy still around? She gets that feedback seconds later, and she can then simply run the whole pipeline again. She takes another picture exactly with what the customers want and runs it through the fully automated pipeline. So this is the analogy that I have for my parents, because it explains, I believe, two important things. It is going away from big bang releases of 24 pictures you take over a period of time and then release it all at once to smaller iterations. And the second thing is, it's a fully automated pipeline, where in this case, my wife now, she has all the tools at her fingertips to take a picture, make it better, deploy it, and also decides what to do with the feedback. Because maybe she gets very angry feedback. Because she posted something online that offends people, she can still decide whether to take it off or not, right? And I believe this is the other big thing, a pipeline and feedback. And the last thing is she's under control, and she's responsible for her actions. So that's the same way we do it at DynaTrace. So how does this translate to DynaTrace? I mentioned this earlier. At DynaTrace, our CTO and founder, Bernd Greifeneder, he said a couple of years ago, he's done with having a development team, a testing team, an operations team. What he said, we're doing a 90-degree shift. That means we want to have developers or development teams or feature and application teams end-to-end responsible for what they're doing. They figure out what to build based on customer feedback, based on figuring out what's happening on the market, based on observing the competition. They are building the new features, and they are pushing it into production, and they deal with the feedback. What they need underneath is the same what Apple built for my wife, a fully automated pipeline with all the tools and things on it that allow the developers, or in this case my wife, to take the pictures and push it out. And in our case, we have a DevOps team or a pipeline team that is delivering all of these tools and then onboarding and mentoring our developers to use these tools. Okay? Make sense? So, quickly, so we went from 2 releases per year, where I mentioned I started with DynaTrace in 2008. Back in 2011 still, we deployed our, now we call it classic product, twice a year for our mainly enterprise customers. It was an on-premise product only. So you had to download it, you could install it, and it's a monitoring product. And this was the goal. The goal was, which we reached in 2017, instead of doing 2 releases per year, we're now doing 26 releases. So every sprint we internally develop, like I guess everybody else these days, in 2-week sprints, and every sprint gets automatically deployed to all of our SaaS-based customers. And every second sprint, so every 4 weeks, we deploy the sprint to all customers that run our software on-premise. Okay? The most important thing is, and this is actually the most challenging part, our CTO said it's not only important to deliver new features every other week, but it's very important in case we mess up or in case something like a heartbleed happens or any other security issue, anything dramatic happens, we need to be able to react to this within an hour. So if we have to make a hotfix or any patch, we need to have a pipeline with a fast lane to production. And that's important for us as well. This is the most challenging thing, and this is also where I said earlier, we always have like our ups and downs in terms of how good we are from a maturity level. This is a very hard one to keep. So enabled was everything by our DevOps team. Initially, when we started that transformation, we had 4 people in that DevOps team. They went up to 7. Now they're back to 4. This DevOps team was acting on the one side as engineers, on the other side as product managers. I already mentioned this earlier. Our DevOps team was really there to build this underlying pipeline of tools. You see here a couple of tools. We started our own transformation in 2018? In 2012-13, we started to rethink on how we develop. So we actually built our own pipeline visualization, this here and this here, where we visualize which team is deploying which particular build, which particular environment. We built integrations into Jira. We built our own log monitoring actually into our product. So we are, DynaTrace is a monitoring company, so we do monitoring of systems, of applications, of services, of end users. So we use our own product. And what our developers said, if you want us to use our own product, we need certain features. And one of the features that they actually demanded from us was log analytics, which is, by the way, right now built out of our Gdansk office. Right? Log analytics is one of them. Also, better integration with AWS. We are running 100% of our SaaS offering in AWS. And we also built AWS monitoring capabilities. It's also done by our Gdansk team. What else? There's a couple of other things I'll come to later. But we built a lot of our tooling ourselves. If we would do it again, if we would start now, we will probably use a couple of the things that are out there right now, because there's great pipeline visualization tools, there's orchestration tools. We built a lot of the orchestration ourselves. Here are some numbers, and I'm very proud of the number, or we're all very proud of the number in the middle. That's why I highlighted it. more quality. Because the biggest challenge is deploying faster is easy, but if you can deploy crap very fast, but it's not only crap, it's quality that you want to deploy. And it was a tough way to get there, but what we have achieved by making developers responsible for production, when developers decide to deploy something into production, the first thing they do is they actually look at production monitoring data. So they deploy something into our SaaS environment and then say, are there any exceptions we haven't seen before? Are there any strange logs? Are users behaving differently? And if so, let's figure out what the root cause is and fix it as fast as possible before we get customers open up a support ticket. What that meant in the old days, when we only had our old product, our classic product that was installed on-premise, where we didn't really have a feedback loop, like this constant monitoring, we got 100% of feedback from customers by opening up a support ticket. And for those of you that have dealt with customers out there, right, support tickets typically don't start, dear developer, you're the best person in the world. They typically start with, why did your update crash my whole system? What's wrong with you, right? So we converted this from 100% negative feedback to our developers fixed a lot of these problems proactively. And the best thing is, as a developer now, you immediately see when your feature is deployed and how many people are using it within the first hour, within the first day, within the first week, and how this actually impacts usage of the overall system. And this is much more rewarding. All right, so how do we start? And this is a lot of bimodal steps, blah, blah, blah. Some of my marketing colleagues came up with some good terms, but we're on a technical conference, so I'm skipping some of this. So I started 10 years ago. This is how our logo looked like back then, DynaTrace, and we were very picky on the lowercase d and the uppercase T. That's how you write DynaTrace and not else. So this was our on-premise product. This was developed mainly out of Linz, and we already did some agile development, but the quality at the end of the sprint was actually not that good. That's why we had 5 months of development and then 1 month of hardening, the classical agile fall. Then we got acquired by CompuWare. I'm not sure if CompuWare should be a known entity in the space. For us, it was a curse and a blessing. It was a blessing because all of a sudden we were a global company. It was a curse because instead of being 250 people startup, we were all of a sudden 8,000 people. And we felt like there's a lot of constraints if you're working all of a sudden in a big company. But we still kept on innovating, so we made sure that our classic product kept using the latest technology. We were lifting and shifting it into the cloud, learning something, how we can make our classic product better. But then what we really did, and this was one of, I think, the biggest and smartest decision that our management did, we said we have a product that is very successful, but we also know it's not going to be successful forever because it was built for monitoring the classical monolithic apps. I gave those people that were in the meeting this morning in my presentation, we're all moving towards microservices or serverless. These tools were not built for that. That's why we also said we need to build a new tool, and if we do it, we build it right. We build it in a way that we can also deploy it in the way we want our customers to deploy their software. So we actually founded a company called Ruxit. So it was an incubation within DynaTrace, where we built all the latest and greatest. And since a year and a half now, we brought that internal startup back under the DynaTrace umbrella, and everything you now see under DynaTrace is this new full stack monitoring product. So we did a bimodal approach. Here's a couple of things we tried and where we learned hard lessons. So the first thing we did, we used our classical product, our Java monolithic product, and we said we want to run it as SaaS. We want to learn what does it actually mean to run a SaaS business. Back in the days, CompuWare, we had a lot of data centers around the world, and they said, we have so many data centers, and we have a NOC team, they can operate our software. But I'm not sure who of you has dealt with, who is in the operations side? Has anybody in operations? You are everything. Oh, you're only, huh? Oh, you're manager of operations. And you're coding, and you're a manager, and you're... So we had to deal with people like you, but probably they're the previous generation. And the previous generation of NOC teams that we had, they said, if you want to change something, you open up a change request that will be discussed on a Wednesday afternoon, East Coast time, and if it gets approved, it gets deployed a week later. And obviously, this doesn't help us to get closer to we want to deploy something within 1 hour. So that was not good. Then we said we want to try it ourselves. We want to lift and shift into AWS. Our founder actually, what's your name, by the way? Marcin? So we had an equivalent of Marcin, right? We gave Marcin, our CTO gave Marcin 3 months. He said, we give you 3 months to provide us flexibility like AWS, or we go to AWS. What do you think happened? Exactly, we went to AWS. Right? We are now back in our own data centers as well. We have a combination, but back then we had to go to AWS. Now the challenging thing was, we said we do lift and shift, we use AWS, but we do it internally, within our own development organization. All of our developers said, are you crazy, right? We are not paid for that. You didn't hire me for being on call. So developers will never do that, right? Who wants to be on call here? Nobody wants to do that. So that's why to the rescue came Anita Engleder. She's our DynaTrace DevOps lead. She started and incubated the DevOps team, where she was responsible for building that pipeline, for building all the tools that then allow developers to safely and securely push code changes through the pipeline, to get all the monitoring, to have the failover, the rollback, and all these mechanisms. But what she also said, I understand this will not happen within the first day or within the first month, maybe not even within the first year. That's why in the beginning her team also took operations responsibilities. That means her team was on call. And they said, we're doing this as long as it takes until the pipeline is good enough. A couple of other things we learned. We started moving things in the cloud, and we went from our 6 months to 1 month. And this was now, our classical product first, the lessons learned. The biggest lesson learned, which was very interesting for us, right? Our old product, our classical product, this was like 5 years ago, had 1 gigabyte, it was a 1 gigabyte download and was very error prone. This was the first time when we learned how painful it is to run our own software and to update our own software, right? If you run it yourself, you learn a lot. So that's why when we learned and we said, okay, we now understand all the challenges. That's why we need to break the monolith apart, not into microservices, because microservices is not the answer to everything, but at least into individual components. So we can install our backend separately with our front end, with our collectors and our agents. Everything is automatically updatable. Also, we can do A/B testing. So this is things we learned in our own experimentation. The next thing we learned, this is now goes out to all the developers. And by the way, I used to be a developer too, so I am still allowed to talk bad about developers because I'm the same breed. Works on my machine. This was always great at the end of the sprint review, but it didn't work for us anymore. So now what we do, every developer, every team that wants to show their features, their stories, they have to commit to master, and master gets deployed at the end of the sprint into our production environment. That means they can only demo sprint results in our production environment, because otherwise it's not done. Now, here's one thing though, we have 2 production environments. We have our own production environment where we monitor our website, our support system, our Jira, our community, our wiki. So that's our own production. And then after that is our production environment where we run our customers on. But making this decision was very essential. Because what's your name? Michael. Michael, if you say, I want to show this feature, you need to commit it to master, then it gets deployed, and then you crash DynaTrace.com, or you crash, more importantly, Dev Jira, our Jira, where you can no longer look at your Jira tickets, but neither of them can, then it's like, oh, now I see my impact, right? And by the way, we brought DynaTrace.com down several times in the beginning when we changed that process. But our management said it is okay, right? As long as we learn and as long as this doesn't happen for another 3 months. So that's why we started building the awareness on how critical quality is, and that we need to do something about it. But this was very cool. Next thing, essential end user feedback. Who in here is a product manager? Who defines? No product managers? Who is more on the sales side? Is anybody? Okay, so we had a lot of sales in our organization, and maybe they don't want to raise their hand because they fear I call them out. We had a lot of salespeople that said, we need this feature because there's a $1 million deal at stake, right? And so we were heavily driven by the salespeople that shouted the loudest. That was not good. So we always thought we know what our customers need based on what our salespeople told us, until we built monitoring into actually figuring out what are our customers actually really doing with the product. And I'm highlighting this. Now, this is now, I guess, the norm, because most of us, if you're building web applications, that's easy, right? You have monitoring basically for free. But this was actually for our classic product that our customers install behind a firewall on-premise. It was a Java-rich client app back then. It was like 5-6 years ago. But we built in a little tool that is called, or a feature, it was called User Improvement Program. So if you install this Java-rich client the first time and you open it up, it says, do you want to participate in an anonymous user improvement program? Because then we will send statistics back to DynaTrace about which features are used. And this all of a sudden helped us to figure out which dashboards people opened up, which features they used, but more importantly, what they didn't use. And then we cross-checked with our sales organization what they demanded, and then we saw that nobody ever used these features. So now internally we have a little blacklist. So we have a blacklist of salespeople that we know they can shout as loud as they want, but we have the proof that they are just shouting loud, but we're not going to follow just the loudest anymore. Okay? We do the same thing now also for, obviously our new product. Our new DynaTrace is all web-enabled, so we're using a lot of flow analysis. We figure out how people are navigating through the system, and therefore figure out what is used, what is not used, and then from that give a better experience. Another cool thing that happened, automated error analysis. By the way, is anybody in here a DynaTrace customer? Yeah, a couple. You can raise your hand. Have you ever opened up a support ticket with DynaTrace? Lucky you. But if you open up a support ticket in DynaTrace, there's one thing we ask you. Please upload what we call a support archive. So our classical product writes a lot of log files, and we have an upload button, and it basically zips all the log files, and then you take this and upload it to our support ticket system. Our support ticket system is using Jira, and then the old process was always, there's a ticket coming in. Now I'm looking at you. What's your name? Camille? Camille was assigned to the ticket because he's the expert. He looked at this file. Camille had to extract the zip file. Then Camille knew I only have to look here, and if I find this, I look here, and if I find something in here, then I look at this log file, and then I know what it is. And then Camille said, this is really boring. Right? So that's when Camille and his colleagues came up with Archie. Archie is the support archive analyzer, where Camille and the teams now, they can write rules, log analytics rules, where every time when a support archive is loaded to a Jira ticket, Archie, as we call it, Archie will automatically extract that zip file and run through all the rules that you and your colleagues wrote. And then automatically reply back to Jira saying, I am matching all of these rules, here's the most likely root cause, or here's the fix. Right? Because this automates all the tedious, I have to manually look at all the log files. And every time when you're updating a new feature or bringing something up, a new feature, then you're also writing a log archive analyzer rule that says, in the future, if a customer sends a log file and you see these log messages, then either send me an immediate message because I want to be aware automatically, or just reply with as designed, or send them a link to a hotfix. Another thing we learned, when we moved to the cloud, so as I said, the first thing is we moved our stuff that was normally run on premise by our customers into the cloud, like a lift and shift. And what was great is we were updating on a regular basis, right? We could update. And what happened here on July 3rd was we updated to the latest version of our DynaTrace build, but actually there was no new features added in, but one of our third-party vendors that are providing log analytics or a logging framework, they said, you're on an old logging framework and you should update because the one you're using right now has a security vulnerability. So we said, okay, we patch it and we update it right away. All of a sudden, we saw memory usage go up by 40% and CPU go up by 4x. Turned out that the version we updated to, that they told us to update to, had a memory leak, right? Which obviously increased memory usage, garbage collection goes up, CPU goes up. Fortunately, we used Amazon as a very scalable architecture, but still, at the end of the month, we had to pay a lot of money, which is not great. So therefore, what we learned from this, we are no longer just blindly trusting also our vendors. They also have to go through rigorous tests in our CI. And if somebody listened to my talk this morning, what we also test in our CI now, every time we push a build through, we look at memory consumption, we look at how many objects are on the heap after certain tests. So we also built this capability into our monitoring product, where we can trigger memory dumps and memory comparisons and figure out, since we updated this library, we have 1 million more string objects on the heap after we run these tests than the build before, so something is wrong. All right, so some of the lessons learned from our classical product. The next thing what I mentioned, this was then the time when we started incubating. So we were part of CompuWare. We kept innovating on DynaTrace, which was our now classical monitoring, but we incubated Ruxit. And here we had a couple of things that we wanted to achieve because we knew how painful it was on our old development process. Our architect said, and our team leads and our developers demanded, we need to have a pipeline that is of high quality and a build should not take longer than 10 minutes. Right? And we have a couple of lines of codes. This was the classical product now, but you can see it's a large code base. We did no longer achieve this with our classical product. With our classical product, we had a couple of things, like we still had a monolith, and the way tests were triggered, as you can see here, every time when a build was triggered in commit, so it was all on SVN, the build took itself, the compilation of the monolith, I think, took about half an hour, so this is even not factored in. So half an hour additionally. Then we had to run all the unit tests. After that, we ran the slow unit tests, and then we ran the smoke tests. And this was all one big bundle. So it took 30 minutes, what I forgot to add here, plus 35 minutes until a developer got any type of feedback. We changed this. Right? We started extracting things. So we went to Git. Developers are working on their branches. Every time when you are making a code change, you automatically get the key unit test executed for your particular component, the base UI tests if nothing broke, some check style, and also one key end-to-end test. In total, that takes 7 minutes. So within 7 minutes, you immediately get feedback of whether you broke something or didn't break something, and that was essential. And then every time when you were good enough and you said, let's put it down to master, then we had another set of unit tests that we were executing. Now you can see here, these are the numbers on individual branches and master commits. What we do right now, these are numbers from last year, because developers can obviously they work on their own branches. These are some of the numbers we execute. 31,000 unit and integration tests per hour, 60 hours worth of UI tests. What we do here, we're leveraging Docker heavily to execute Selenium tests in parallel. We also use Sauce Labs as one of the vendors that is executing functional tests from different browsers in the cloud. And this is great for functional pass and fail, but then what we thought, we want to capture more information. If we already execute functional tests, then we should do more. We should figure out How many SQL statements are executed by our components? How many log messages are generated? How many exceptions are thrown? How much memory is allocated? So we extended our own monitoring product to give us this data also for each individual test. And then we basically baselined all of these metrics for every build. So every build, when our tests execute, for every test we basically capture how many bytes of traffic is generated by this particular test, how many database statements are executed, how many string objects are allocated. And we baseline this from build to build and from test to test. And if a regression is detected, we stop the pipeline. And one thing we did, because Jenkins pipelines are really pretty, but if nobody looks at it, then who cares? That's how we came up with the DynaTrace UFO. All right, we call it UFO because it looks like a UFO, an unidentified flight object. And actually, it's positioned here. So what you see here, this is our, as you can see, our cafeteria, the 2 coffee machines. And the idea was initially, we wanted to place the UFO next to the coffee machine, which is also here, is the exit door of the office. So the idea was, if I'm a developer and I commit, it takes me about 10 minutes to walk to the coffee machine, have a quick chat, and walk back. Within that 10 minutes, the UFO should still be green. Because if it's not green, it means I broke the build. Also, because it's next to the exit door, if I am coding the whole day, and then 5 minutes before I leave, I click commit, and then I want to run out, and I see while running out, it is red, I most likely first go back and figure out if it's me that broke everything or not. It's a very simple thing, but it had a huge impact. Now, the whole thing is also on GitHub. The 3D printing instructions are on there. The source code is on there that powers it. It's basically it connects to your Wi-Fi and then provides a REST API. And we hook it up with Jenkins. We hook it up with our DynaTrace production monitoring, and that's why we have 2 rings. One ring shows how is the pipeline currently. Is the pipeline green? And the top ring visualizes if we have any problems in production right now. So it should always be green. All right. Next thing, I talked about this in the morning. We have Thomas Steinmaurer. He's our chief performance architect. What he has several continuous performance environments. And I explained this today in the morning, but what he essentially does, he has an environment that is constantly under load with different types of load. In this case, it is lower throughput, but transactions that are taking longer, and then he has like high throughput, like he's hitting the system really hard with easier transactions, and he's alternating this on a 24-hour basis, so 12 hours, 12 hours. Every day in the morning, he automatically deploys the latest build from master overnight, and then he says he's looking at what he calls the performance signature. What is the performance signature? So every build, so every column here is now a build. For every build, he looks at a set of metrics, and it depends on the component that he's testing, the component that is under test in this environment, where he may focus more on response time, on throughput, or resource consumption, or bytes transferred. But it's a very simple thing. They write the data from build to build into a database, and then they always compare it with the previous build and see visually, immediately by looking at it, which of the metrics, performance metrics or architectural metrics, have a regression. And then he automated the whole thing because nobody should look at red and then send an email. He completely automated this now, where he then additionally creates a Jira ticket, assigns it to all the developers that made code commits in the last 24 hours on this particular component, and sends them the link to this report. And then they have additional links to the detailed dashboards with the diagnostics information. In case you're interested in this, Thomas just did a session at the Virtual Pack event. It's called Continuous Cluster Performance Validation at DynaTrace. It was uploaded to YouTube yesterday, so you should be able to find this now on YouTube. Last thing, deploy, fail, and recover fast. So we are very, I think, proud right now that we can deploy very fast. But deploying fast alone is not good enough. You also have to figure out if the stuff that you deployed and if you think everything is good. If something fails, you want to be notified immediately. So here's what you see is the time frame from end of April until May 1st. These are things we measure as well with DynaTrace because we monitor our own website. So this scenario is actually monitoring how many people are on our website because we monitor DynaTrace with DynaTrace. And green, yellow, and red, I always call it management-friendly colors. Looking at you again. So how many people are on the system, how many users, and we have a very coarse granularity of happy users, tolerating users, and frustrated users. We factor in performance. We use something like the AppDex, which is a standard. And we have the conversion rate. In this case, conversion rate is how many people go to our website and actually sign up for a free trial. Right? So, May 1st, our marketing team started a campaign and sent out thousands and thousands of emails to people that we had in our database in the hope that people are actually going to our website and signing up. And by looking at the live data, looked pretty cool, right? So first day, all good. Second day comes along. The numbers keep growing. That's great. However, what they also saw is that while the overall number was growing, the number of not so happy users was growing and the conversion rate was actually down from the previous day. And then the marketing team, I need another victim. What's your name? Martin? Matt. So they went to Matt and said, hey, something is wrong. Right? We reached a certain user level. Matt, can you help us? Because it seems the website is getting slow and they changed their behavior. And then Matt said, sure, I know what to do. I have a pipeline that we can deploy instantly. So Matt came up with a fix, deployed the fix, and guess what happened? The fix that you fixed was only working on your Safari. This was actually the case in our case. So the fix that Matt, or in this case actually the real name was Hubert. Hubert fixed something, and he only tested it on a particular test environment where he used his browser of choice, which was a Safari, but he didn't anticipate there's a lot of users out there that are using Internet Explorer. And he fixed something on a JavaScript implementation in the browser, and he introduced a regression that basically caused a JavaScript exception. That means we saw a drop in happy users, a spike in frustrated, and obviously a drop in conversion because none of the IE users could fill out the sign-up form anymore. Right? Now, here's the good news. Two things happened. Actually, one thing happened. Matt, you were responsible for the web UI, or the website. Your UFO went red because your UFO was bound to the number of JavaScript errors on the page, because that's a metric that is important for you. You are the marketing guy. Your UFO went also red because your metric on the UFO, because we do not only have one UFO, we have many UFOs now for every team. Yours went red because the conversion rate dropped. And because you pressed the button and 5 minutes later your thing went red, and then at the same time your thing was red, you both saw that you're both on fire. So maybe there's something that goes hand in hand. So knowing this data live allowed Matt to actually fix the problem, roll out a new hotfix, and everything was back to normal, and also conversion rate was back to normal. What I want to tell you here is it is very important to have this data available, or at least for us it was very important to have this data available and then react on it as fast as possible. Because in the end, we should all, I think there's a term called no ops right now, but I think what we should actually do, we are all ops, because in the end we're all supporting our operations. Because if we don't operate, we don't make money, and if we don't make money, we don't get paid, and we don't have a job anymore. So whatever we do, we have to make sure that we are supporting this. Now, this worked well in our case because Hubert in our case and the marketing team, they knew how to operate our data, they knew how to look at our dashboards, but we thought for a regular customer of DynaTrace, this is much too complex. So that's also why in case you ever get a chance to look at how DynaTrace works, this is also why we invested a lot in what we call our automatic root cause analysis, our AI engine that automatically looks at all the dependencies. It knows that the JavaScript error is actually depending on the conversion rate or vice versa. that your code change was actually responsible for it. We also know how many users are actually on the system, so we can figure out is this very critical or not critical. So we build things in the product to make this easier. And we kind of drove all of our feature implementation that support us in the DevOps mantra, in the NoOps or AllOps mantra. We developed it, driven by our engineering team, tested out in our production environment, and now hopefully our customers can also benefit from it. Does this make sense? A little bit? Okay, you got 5 more minutes. Quickly, what we are trying to do now, so every time when we are, and this is something I also talked about this morning, and whether you use DynaTrace or any other monitoring tool, I don't care, but I believe this is a very important thing. I call it shifting right. Every time now when we deploy every time we make a configuration change with whatever tool you have, in our case it is Jenkins, it's Ansible, we use a little bit of Bitbucket, we also use some code deploy, but every time when we deploy, we push this information over to our monitoring tool. So our monitoring tool always knows, and the monitoring is part of our platform, our monitoring tool always knows who deployed which particular change, at which time, in which environment. And this is important. And what we also now start doing, we also asked our developers to not only write code and tests, we also start asking them to write remediation scripts. So what would you do in case your component is under heavy load and it doesn't perform as expected? Would you scale up? Would you horizontally scaling, vertical scaling? Would you take it out, roll back to the previous version? What would you do? So we also write automation scripts. And every time when we make a deployment, we also tell DynaTrace about what is the remediation script, which then allows us to do something like this. When we detect a problem, we know how many people are impacted. We can then obviously, open up a Slack channel and all this stuff. This is all what we do. We do ChatOps. But more importantly, what we have captured is a chain of events that we've observed when the problem happened. And it would start here with, we deployed a particular version, right? Matt, was it Matt again? Yeah, Matt deployed a particular version, and Matt also told us about which script he would execute in case his change causes a problem. So we can actually then call this script. And this script would not just be, say, restart the server. Your script actually has the ability to say what actually happened. The first thing that happened, CPU was exhausted. And at the same time, we saw an increase in traffic. So the first thing you would do is probably add some service instances. Or maybe there was high garbage collection. Your previous change may have been playing around with the memory settings. So maybe we revert it back. Or you did some blue-green deployment. So let's switch to green, where maybe some hung threads have been observed in a service that you just experimented with. So maybe we just restart that service. So we are encouraging our developers to write these smart scripts that we can then automatically trigger in case a problem happens. What else do we do? In case your script is mitigating the impact, we automatically also update the Jira ticket or whatever ticketing system you use to push a change through into production. So when you come back at 8 o'clock in the morning, you see, at 1:51 in the morning, something happened, my script was triggered, and step number 3 fixed the issue. Good, nobody woke me up. That's cool. Better than waking people up at 2 o'clock in the morning. If it doesn't work, maybe you initiate a rollback and then mark your pull request as bad. And if everything is still bad, then you can still escalate. And then we can call you in. Right? Go back to our operations. All right. So I think that's the end of my story. I want to leave you with one sentence because I like this. Be proud of your features. And I mentioned this earlier. All of our engineers are no longer just getting feedback from angry customers by opening up a support ticket. Our developers immediately see who is using their software, how fast they adopt, and if it actually makes an impact. What they also see is which features are never used, which is also great because you can get finally rid of these features and no longer have to maintain code that you don't want to maintain anyway. You don't have to maintain the tests anymore. This is all very important. Makes us all happier, I believe. All right, and whether we want to call it no ops or all ops, I think actually all ops makes more sense. Yeah, this is it from my perspective. Hopefully you got some ideas. And as I mentioned earlier, I know that everybody seems to be hiring right now, but we are also hiring. And if you want to learn more, upstairs on the second floor we have a booth, some cool technology we're building. And if you have more questions, feel free to ask. Yeah, it was 60 hours worth of UI tests per build. So what we are trying to execute as many UI, so front-end tests, Selenium tests as possible, and we do this by using, on the one side, Docker to parallelize test execution. So we execute a lot of the scripts in parallel, plus we also use Sauce Labs, which is a company that is executing functional tests from different browsers. That's how we can cramp or pack a lot of tests into a very small time frame. So it depends on which code you're changing, because we are actually not executing all the tests all the time. We are selective in which tests we execute depending on which code you changed. So it really depends on the component, what you touched. What we're also now investing in, if we have tests that are constantly green, let's say over the last 7 days, we don't execute these tests anymore on every commit. It doesn't make sense. We take them into different test rotations. So let's say you have 100 tests and 99 of them are always green. Why do you execute them all the time? Because they're probably green again. You were taking them into a different rotation. So instead of every build, some of them every day, some of them only every week. What's important is if you have tests and they fail from one build to the next, and this is the first test you want to execute in the next build, because you want to figure out if you fix the regression. So that's why it's a little hard to say how long we have the numbers, obviously. I need to look at our Jenkins pipelines that we have, and then I can give you on a project-by-project basis what the average time is. But this was just the statistics to show with using virtualization, we can put a lot of tests in a small time window. Good. Then, thank you. And if there's more questions, you will find us upstairs or come up here. Good.